Hey guys, I'm Strength Coach Friedman, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a recipe on how to make fermented vegetables. Sports nutrition is a big thing today. Well, it's always been a thing, but it's getting more attention these days. Athletes are trying to perform better and they're training harder. Although one of the overlooked aspects of sports nutrition tends to be gut health. A lot of individuals are thinking about, what macronutrients they're putting into the body, but not too many coaches or dietitians are looking at what macronutrients are actually being absorbed by the body. And they found that having better gut flora and the right balance of gut flora can improve the amount of actual nutrient uptake that you have and helping to prepare for your athletic endeavors. Real quick, I just want to give you some background on what it means to eat fermented foods. There's two main types of fermentation today. There's alcohol fermentation, which is how you get things like beer and wine. And then there's also lactic acid fermentation, which uses bacteria primarily rather than just yeast to create essentially a lactic acid within the foods, which will help to prevent the foods from spoiling and also promotes the development of different bacteria that actually live in our digestive tract. The small intestine of the human body actually serves as a fermentation chamber where many of the foods that we consume actually get fermented by the bacteria that are in there to help metabolize some of the things so we can absorb them, or just to help further break down foods for absorption. So here's everything you need to make these fermented vegetables. You're going to need a large bowl, okay, where the vegetables are going to be, a cutting board, a knife, and then a mix of different vegetables. You can do a variety of things. I like to use a red cabbage, a green cabbage, one leek, a few leaves of kale. I'll throw in a bundle of cilantro and sometimes some other herbs. Another key ingredient would be some sort of salt. I use a Himalayan sea salt, and you need to create a brine solution for the vegetables. The brine solution is important because many of the other bacteria that you don't want growing in the lactic acid fermentation don't do well in a brine solution, while the lactic acid can outcompete those bacteria. So you want to create a favorable environment where these bacteria can thrive and outcompete anything else that we don't want in there. So brine solution is key. You're going to add a few tablespoons of salt to the vegetables, depending on how large of a vegetable concoction that you're making. The actual process of fermenting vegetables is actually relatively easy. All you really need to do is put vegetables in a jar that can be sealed, so the anaerobic processes of the fermentation can occur. And all you have to do is submerge that vegetable in water. And right there you can get a successful fermentation. Probably how people did it a long time ago, and before they really even knew what they were doing in terms of creating fermentation. They were probably just trying to store food. Today, we have some extra things we can do to kind of aid the process along and get things functioning a little bit better. What we do is we add salt to dehydrate the vegetables to create a brine solution. It allows you to fit more vegetable into the jars. At the same time, it'll minimize any growth of things that you don't want in there. When it comes to chopping the vegetables, it pretty much comes down to the size you want. I go for bite-sized pieces. If you ever eat a kimchi, anytime the pieces are large enough to pick up with chopsticks. However, if you look at something like a sauerkraut, which is the same kind of fermented vegetable, it's made in Eastern Europe, it's much more finely chopped. So the preference to your chopping size is really of your own. You can make it with as little as just one type of vegetable, or you could do a variety, as I like to do. So first step, pretty simple. I'm going to take our vegetables, I'm going to give them a wash. Once the vegetables are washed, we're going to begin chopping. So right here, this is the green cabbage. Chop off the end. From here, I'm just going to split the cabbage a few times. one of the great things about making fermented vegetables, it's relatively easy, it's relatively fast, and it's relatively cheap. So here you don't have a lot of cooking space. All you need is a little space to put these jars, and you can create a natural, healthy probiotic without going out and spending a fortune and other stuff. But you always want to be, mindful of what's happening with the fermentation process. I've never created a bad batch of fermented vegetables, but with any type of food preparation, the risk always occurs. So make sure that everything's cleanly. Make sure you let your vegetables ferment for enough time so that the acidity level is high enough to kill off anything that shouldn't be in there. And also just use good judgment. If anything looks weird colorations or smells, or looks like other things are visibly growing in the vegetables, don't eat them. Avoid anything that could be potentially hazardous. And I always encourage you to do a little more research on, what the fermented vegetables should look like, taste like, and smell like. Usually there should be a slight vinegary kind of scent to them. If it's not smelling like that, could be an issue with what you're making. Then I'm going to be chopping the red cabbage. Fortunately, this cabbage is a little bit smaller, so it'll be a little bit easier to go through. So usually I try to quarter the cabbage. And I try to slice it up from there. Now, because of this red cabbage and the pigment of the cabbage, when the vegetables ferment, the brine solution will start to become a bit of a reddish, pinkish color. In this instance, that's okay. However, if you're using vegetables that do not have any sort of pigment, and your solution begins to start turning pink, or the vegetables become pink, could be something grown in there that you don't want to eat, so then avoid that. But again, if you're using something with a bright pigment, like beets or cabbage, it's natural for the colors to affect the overall fermented vegetable outcome. And again, most of these pieces that I'm cutting, about half an inch to an inch. That's usually the size I like. But again, feel free to cut them as finely, as coarsely as you like. Next, I'll be cutting up the leek. I tend to think of a leek as vegetables almost like a cross between an onion and celery. It's got a lot of good fibers like cellulose and other thick fibers that we usually can't digest on our own. But these kinds of fibers are great for the gut flora that live in our digestive tract. So I always like to incorporate some things like this because not only are the bacteria going to grow on it and help us ferment, that the bacteria that are already in our digestive tract and our small intestine will also be able to thrive off of this very thick fibrous material. Key thing with leeks, sometimes they have a tendency to get dirt caught in between the leaves. So I usually say, once you cut it in half, I recommend, going through it under the water and making sure you don't have any dirt or sand between the leaves. I usually like to first half and then quarter my leeks. That's the way I find easiest to chop them. It's the ideal size for this dish. Once I half them, I quarter them, and then from here I just kind of chop them, usually about half-inch long pieces. Next, I'm chopping up some parsley. I put all the kind of stemmy thicker parts because the fermentation process will help break down some of that fiber. And that is great fiber that you don't really want to miss out on. Next I'll be chopping up some cilantro. I really love the flavor of cilantro, and it seems to have a lot of good properties, nutritional properties. And if you don't like to taste cilantro, you don't have to use it. But many times when the fermentation process goes through, a lot of the vegetables kind of lose the intensity of their flavor to kind of just produce one homogeneous fermented taste for all the vegetables. And now we'll be chopping up some kale. And now I'm chopping up some stalks of celery. Celery also has a lot of good fibers that are very chewy, kind of get stuck in your teeth. And these are the kind of fibers, again, that, well, bacteria like a variety of fibers, but some of the best gut flora like these really tough, insoluble fibers. And that provides some good nutrition for them. So remember, when we eat, we're not just eating for us, but we're eating for the trillions of bacteria and yeast that live within our systems. They say that we have so many bacteria in our gut that the cells of the bacteria actually outnumber our own human cells 10 to 1. So I've seen talks about gut flora where the presenter jokingly said, "You think you're a human, you're not. You're just a walking bacterial colony." Next I have scallions. So I'm going to save the bottoms of these scallions, try to regrow them from these roots by planting them outside of my garden. Now I'll be chopping up one onion. And now I'm going to work on separating this head of garlic and chop this up. So raw garlic is a little bit intense for most people that just eat plain, but by fermenting it, it really mellows out the flavor. So you're not really tasting that real harsh burn of the garlic, but you're still going to eat it raw. And raw garlic has a lot of good properties. When you start to cook foods, there's a lot going on with the chemistry of food. When you heat foods, you're breaking down fibers and you're causing a lot of chemical reactions within the food. Sometimes these reactions can be beneficial, making certain nutrients more available, more bioavailable, but otherwise it can sometimes damage many of the nutrients in food. So for instance, onions got a lot of great fiber, but when you cook it, it starts breaking down the chains, the carbohydrate chains, the more complex carbs into more simple carbs. That's why onion starts to taste sweet the longer you cook it. When you have caramelized onions, it's very much simple sugar. So yeah, it's still onion, but it's lacking in a lot of the nutritional value you'd get from the raw onion. So a cool thing about fermenting vegetables, you really get to have and really maintain the rawness of the vegetable, like onions, scallions, and garlic, that are usually a little too intense to eat in large amounts on their own, but you still get to eat them raw in the fermented state.